Good morning and a warm welcome to all of you joining us for the session, The Food on Our Tables and How It Gets There. What stands in the way of a sustainable food system? My name is Richard Weg, and together with 24 other students, I've organized this year's St. Gallen Symposium. Over the past 9 months, I have set up several laptops and screens, and over the past weeks, I've also helped set up everything here. But why am I standing on this stage today? Well, for me, sustainability is very, very important. And when preparing for this intro, I've realized that food sustainability has always played a big role in my life. When I was younger, my mother was buying biological food. When I got older and decided to become a vegetarian, food sustainability played a very big role in that step for me. So, but sustainable food goes way beyond that. Tying in nicely with my role at the symposium, innovation and especially technological innovation can help us to get to a more sustainable food system. For instance, whether it's an app that lets you know at the supermarket which groceries are most sustainable, or a fridge that helps you to stay on track which groceries will spoil first. But there's also a more human factor to food. We all know coming together with friends for a nice meal is one of the best things we can do. And this session today will explore how we can shape a food system from the table to from farms to the table for all current and all future generations. And now I will hand it over to our host, Rachel Brooks, who is currently head of the Executive Education Center, Competence Center at the University of St. Gallen.
Wonderful. So it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. As we heard, I'm Rachel Brooks. I'm leading executive education at the Center for Social Innovation here at the University of St. Gallen. And I'm also the program director of the new Bachelor Certificate in Sustainability Management, also here at the university. And next to that, I lecture. Why do I care about this particular topic? This is actually, this laid the foundation for my doctoral work several years ago. So I did lots of research in Latin America and agricultural sourcing communities of a large Swiss multinational. And it really lit a fire under me for this particular topic. So it's a real honor to be here with these distinguished guests here today, who I'll introduce here in a moment. But first, I want to link this back to the topic of this whole symposium, which is scarcity. So we're really living in a time of diminishing resources, but what makes this particularly complex is global demand is only growing along with the population. And this is really a key issue facing our food system. And in light of that, there will need to be a significant transformation. And there is a slide from which is now up, excellent. And this I found really fascinating when I saw it, because what we see here is that the leaders of tomorrow are significantly less confident that consumers are willing to change their consumption habits and pay more for goods than senior executives. And so I want to talk with our panelists a little bit more about this, but I wanted to try to make sense of it for a moment by really pointing out that the leaders of tomorrow face a more fragmented global society than we ever have before. So it's really hard to know, how do we find a central purpose, a common driving purpose around which we can motivate when people are getting their news in so many different places, when there's so many different subcultures of people consuming their information in different corners of the universe? How do we then create unity to help people understand that we need a mindset shift around our consumption patterns? And so the significant transformation that needs to happen is not only to improve social and environmental conditions in line with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement, really to achieve climate targets and ensure a safe and just operating space for humanity within planetary boundaries. So it's really not an option, it's something we must do. And consumption patterns will be part of this, for better or worse. They'll drive us either in the right or in the wrong direction. So hopefully we can identify some solutions here as to how to drive it in the right direction. And just to give a sense of the breadth of the problem, I want to bring up the farm to fork strategy, which is part of the European Green Deal. And it really puts it quite bluntly. And I'll just quote, so I'll just read this briefly. It says, "We need to redesign our food systems, which today account for nearly 1/3 of our global greenhouse gas emissions, consume large amounts of natural resources, result in biodiversity loss, negative health impacts, both under and over nutrition, and do not allow fair economic returns and livelihoods for all actors, and particularly primary producers, so those farmers in our agricultural supply chains, primarily in developing contexts or, as we heard yesterday, the global majority." So in this context, a healthy food system, what does it need to be? It needs to be defined around two central goals. And the first one, to ensure global access to healthy food and end hunger. The second goal, however, is to promote health and regeneration of land, biodiversity, and communities along value chains. And so on that note, it is my real honor to introduce our panelists. We have Benjamina Bollag, who is the founder and CEO of Uncommon, formerly Higher Stakes, which is a food tech startup specializing in cultivated meat. And their startup has developed new technologies to tackle cost and scalability in this industry. And then we have Georg Strasser-Müller, who is the country director of Too Good To Go Austria and Switzerland, and he established Too Good To Go on the Austrian market from scratch. And then we have Michael Lacour, who is the CEO of Coop Trading, which is leading the largest purchasing organization in the Nordics, supplying products to consumers in Coop Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland. So a lot of knowledge from a lot of different areas of this really essential sector on the stage. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I want to jump right in now. Michael, you know, when we were talking about this panel, you brought up this important point, which is how has scarcity impacted each of us? And so I want to open with that question and make this link. How has scarcity impacted your business from your perspective as the CEO of Coop Trading, but also in your other endeavors and your other roles throughout your professional history?
I think I'll start by saying that I've been working within the retail industry in, I guess, some 30 years minimum. And the last 5 years are probably the most challenging and tumultuous years combined. I think there's been more change the last 5 years than there has for the previous 30 or 25 years. And scarcity caused by pandemics, by a change in weather patterns, war, has really uprooted everything. So that really is a base, of course, for change, because you have to question everything. The resilience of the supply chains that we built up in the past years has really been put on display, that we have gone too far in some ways. The issues we have in our supply chain as well, in terms of all the fresh fruits, fruit and vegetables is a great example, where we saw in the past year empty shelves. We couldn't get anything to the shelves. So basically all our systems are challenged. And that impacts the business tremendously. And you know, the combination of a burning platform and what we need to do is ideal in many ways, I think. So it's now that changes really need to happen. So to answer the question in terms of right now, I think you'll see a retailer, grocery retailing industry that is changing dramatically, has to change dramatically. And I'm sure over the course of the next hour, we'll get into that in different ways. And previously also, I think it's very interesting to see some of the graphs I've seen here the last day about the belief in the future. So one thing is that you do functional organizational changes, but I also think it requires something completely different from our leadership than before, and also the collaborations that you need to now have and establish across industries and government and so on and so forth. So it's had a profound impact.
And I can't not follow up. What about our leadership has to be different? What will we have to change?
Well, I think, when you sit on panels like this, and I've been in with food waste for quite so many years, I see a lot of good intentions, but I think the movements are too slow. I think we as leaders, in my case, being responsible for one of the organizations that has huge impact. So there's about 27 million people in the Nordics. We have about 30% market share. That means, if you translate that, every third breakfast table that has just been executed on in the Nordics, we sit there. We have a responsibility what's on that table. And not just in fluffy words in terms of it should be nutritious and good. But one point I'll keep coming back to, we need to provide it at price points for the many people. And I think that's one of the not talked enough about topics that we equate, and I'm looking at myself, sustainability, healthy products in the prime tier of the brands.
Yeah.
And we reach too few people. And Coop comes out of a cooperative thinking. There's Coop in Switzerland, I noticed on the way in. I knew it, of course. And there is in Italy, there is all over Europe. And we're not connected, but we're connected by the idea of something that came out of the late 1800s, of providing more nutritious food at the right price points. And it comes out of the communities. So the idea, I think, has been difficult to work with, but maybe it has new life to it.
No, that's great. And I can't wait to dig into a couple more of those points in a minute. Benjamina, first, can I ask you if scarcity has played a role in the work you've done launching your company Uncommon? So what have the challenges been? How's it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason our whole industry exists is because of scarcity. So maybe just for those of you who don't know, cultivated meat, the way it works is we take a small sample of cells from the animal, we expand it, we turn it into muscle and fat, we then mix it with some plant-based proteins and nutrients to make delicious meat, so in our case, bacon. And the reason we're doing that is because we can't keep going the way we are, because there is scarcity. We have limited land, we have limited water, we have limited energy, we have all those limited resources. The population's growing. There are people coming out of the middle class that want more meat. And I think, coming back to what you said, here sometimes, whether it's in Switzerland or in the Nordics, we're like, oh, well, all my friends are going vegan. Clearly, veganism is rising. But when we look globally, actually meat demand is still continuing to increase. And there is a need for an alternative. In our case specifically as well, one of the reasons for choosing pork is scarcity. So there's a massive still problem on the supply chain of pork. Because of African swine fever, and it goes up and down and up and down. But you've had hundreds of millions of pigs basically dead within a year because of and essentially that causes scarcity, that creates problems with the pricing. So that creates supply chain that are not reliable. You've seen it also with the avian flus going around, and I remember sitting in a random restaurant in London with my friend, and they're like, yeah, well, there's an avian flu, so no ducks today. We just absolutely don't have ducks. And my friend was so upset that she couldn't have her duck in that restaurant. And, you're like, okay, well, this is clearly a first world problem, but actually globally, it isn't a first world problem. We need more nutritious food. We need food that is better. And we think cultivated meat can really help with that.
I can't help but ask one quick question, and that is that most studies do actually show us that a plant-based diet is what will really help human health and really help our environment as well. And so I just sort of want to understand, why not a mindset shift? Why do we also need to focus on cultivated meat? I know that you said that the demand is growing, but But, and I also know from talking to you that health is one of the big things that you care about most. But we see, is meat really the answer, even if it's cultivated?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is it's too slow. Coming back to what Michael said, to shift, 90% of the population's mindset is going to be too slow. Yes, if we all ate a vegan diet, that might be great, but that might create other problems. We have to look at what is unhealthy within meat. A lot of what is unhealthy within meat is the way, it's not your nice farmer in Switzerland that has 3 chickens in the backyard. It's really factory farming, and the way you have those huge pig farms in China, well, pig hotels they call them, because it's stages buildings with all the pigs crammed up and lots of diseases where they fill them with antibiotics, and it's actually all those things that are the unhealthy parts versus actually just meat protein itself.
Okay. No, thank you. Georg. So there's no scarcity of food waste. Can you share how you're addressing this challenge with Too Good To Go, and also how you got started on that track? What's your purpose? Why?
It's not funny, but I thought funny that you asked that question, because we actually have an abundance of food waste. I have a completely different view on what you said, even though I actually share the sentiment. So 10 years ago, I was working for Aldi. So, you're a bit older than me, I take it. So I can't look back to 30 years, but I can look back to around 10 years. The first time I was reading studies of food waste and statistics, was around like 10, 15 years ago as a student, and later at my job at Aldi. And every year, when I got a new statistic or a new study, food waste has actually increased over the years. And I know the data quite well for Austria. So in the beginning, it was around 500,000 tons that we waste every year. Now we're looking at 1 million tons. And what's striking to me is also the environmental impact was in the beginning around 8%. That's caused by 8% of greenhouse gas emissions that is caused by food waste. Now it's 10%. And in the beginning, we had 1/3 of all the food that we waste globally. Now it's 40%. So I really can't say that we have scarcity of food waste. And I'm not sure if you actually know Too Good To Go. Can I maybe see some hands who has downloaded the app or maybe used it? So we're a social impact company, and we have a marketplace where we address food surplus. So we help retailers, we help restaurants, bakeries that have surplus food at the end of the day to sell it through our platform, through our market. And what's striking to me is when we look at the way we grew, so in 2019, we're like 400 people when I joined Too Good To Go. Now we're 1,000 people, and we used to save like 1, 2, 3 meals a day. Now globally, we save around 300,000 meals a day. So, it's great that we have such a massive growth rate over the years, but actually it's going in the complete wrong direction. So when I look at scarcity from a food waste perspective, we actually need to completely turn around and really look at the causes and the sources of food waste, and then how can we actually reduce this in the future. And the more we grow as a business, as Too Good To Go, actually it means we're saving more food that shouldn't have been there in the first place. So we're operating a little bit in let's say, an ambivalent environment, because after all, we're in business because of a market failure. So there shouldn't be that much food waste. There shouldn't be that many retailers, bakery, restaurants. I'm always careful that don't always say the retailers, because they actually waste the most little of the amount. But at the end of the day, it really, we don't have a scarcity problem. We rather have a distribution problem. So with the food that we waste, we could easily feed a lot of people on this world. And that's really the issue we have as Too Good To Go as a society.
Yep, great. Benjamina, I see you want to jump in, please.
Yeah, don't you think it's both? That we have actually an issue with both. We have scarcity, and if we look at meat, the demand for meat, for example, is going to double by 2050. Yes, maybe 10% of it is wasted, maybe it's 40%, but there's still quite, there's still quite a lot that needs to shift and change. So do you not think it's an and problem versus an or?
For sure, yeah. It's not black and white, right? It's not either or. So fully agree with you. But I mean, I think the challenge you get from your friends and colleagues, I think they're quite right. It shouldn't need maybe too good it shouldn't need manufactured meat and so on. But as you say, we're too slow. So I sometimes get the question. What happens with Too Good To Go in 10 years or 20 years? And I always tell them, well, I hope we're out of business because we shouldn't exist. I mean, we're much more than an app and a marketplace. We do all kinds of political engagement. We also do, I would call it positive lobbying for better regulatory affairs and better laws and so on. But eventually, we actually should go out of business because it shouldn't need us. And I think it also, can I say, maybe it shouldn't need you as well in 10 years or in 20 years.
Then you can go work for Benjamina because hopefully you'll have taken over the traditional meat market. Okay, but as long as we're talking about why don't we just dig into this for a little bit longer? Why is there so much food waste? Because I mean, one of the tricky things that we're facing is food is cheaper than ever. Part of that is good because people are able to meet their needs. People are not paying such a huge portion of their salary at the grocery store. For people with less privilege than many of us in this room, this is an existential challenge. This is good. So how do we manage this, making food cheap and accessible, but preventing food waste, and also I'll even skip the part about fairly compensating everyone in the value chain and leave that for a different part of the discussion. But how do we make food accessible and prevent food waste when people that do have the privilege to buy tons of food and let it go bad in the fridge just don't value it the way they should because it's so cheap? Yes.
Yeah, I think when it comes to food waste, I had the privilege, I was just sharing with George earlier, to work with that quite intensively. In my previous position, I was the CEO of IKEA, which most people connect with furniture, I'm assuming. But the biggest seller in IKEA is meatballs, actually. And let's try the raising of hands. How many have tried IKEA meatballs? See, George?
It's more than Too Good To Go.
Yeah. Now,
you can save them on the app, by the way.
And there we really tried to take on the topic of food waste. This is some 10 years ago then, where I think it was still coming up. We weren't really aware of it. And I would say the biggest learning we had was the awareness. We invested in scales in all the kitchens worldwide. And asked all of our co-workers actually to record, not just what you throw out in terms of kilos, but what was it? And that led to a mindset change, because when you went into the kitchen and asked, do we have food waste here? And I asked my wife the same thing. We waste food? No, we don't. And the same thing when you walk into a kitchen, people are simply not really aware. So it's a mindset, it's an educational thing. And then after that, you start changing behavior. But it was, for me at least, a very big surprise that that's really one of the key things where we could make a real difference. And there's an array of other things you can apply. But this is about educating, informing in a way that people can actually understand what can I do as an individual. That really shifted. So we brought in those kitchens food waste down with more than 50%. Pretty short term as well.
But I love this example. And Benjamin, I see you want to jump in. I have to ask a super quick question first, though, because I don't know. I'm sure your company does nothing of the sort, but there was an article a couple years ago about certain Swiss food sellers that were erroneously marking up organic goods because they knew that the privilege of the people that wanted those things was high enough that they would be able to pay for them. So what's the role of, if we need to educate consumers, this is part of it also. Teaching consumers when berries are out of season, you don't stock them on the shelves. Coming up with pre-competitive agreements with other companies to prevent this kind of ridiculous overpricing.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
I think any company with the reach, whether it was the IKEA, which has a huge reach, or as I said, in the Nordics, we have a relatively huge reach. has to take on the role as a good corporate citizen. So that means you have to play a role. You have to have the checks and balances in place to avoid these sort of things. And I would also venture to say the risk to any brand to venture in any of those things is extremely high. But as a corporation, you play an enormous role to ensure that these things do not happen. And I think we also play an enormous role, as we said initially in the first question, in actually changing behavior, pricing things differently, putting the innovation in the right places to ensure that sustainably sourced, healthier products can come at price points for the many and not the few.
Thank you. Benjamina, did you still have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think maybe something to add is that, again, I think behavior change is great, and when we see it, when it happens, it's fantastic, but I think we also have to look at what are the solutions that we can take to help that. So, for example, a company already doing it in the US is Appeal, where they have a coating that they can show, their avocados, their apples, they take a lot less time to go bad. And one of, I'm sure, you can give us the stats, but consumers, a lot of times when I throw things, it's because they go bad and I forgot I had them, or I had a last minute, to stay late at the office, and then it just goes bad. And so I think tackling also the products themselves, so not just the behavior of the consumer, but the product themselves. This is something, for example, in cultivated meat, we think about a lot, because we do things in a cleaner environment, so we have the opportunity to actually have a longer shelf life without needing necessarily all the preservatives. So we want to keep things healthy, but we also want to find solutions that can give the right shelf life to the ingredients.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
Can I add something also what you said earlier? So when you open the fridge and you don't really know what's good and bad, you forgot something, you throw it away, right? And you talked about raising awareness and being really aware of food waste. When I started Too Good To Go in Vienna, it was 2019, we went to all kinds of different restaurants, and it's the beauty of starting that business. I was doing it by myself. So I would go to actually one restaurant after the other. And every time I talked to a restaurant, and I went to the hipster places, the sustainable places, the cool places, and I thought, this is the restaurants that really gonna make a difference in the future. And at that time, Too Good To Go had, I think, 100,000 partners already. It was working in Amsterdam, it was working in Paris, so we had a lot of track record, actually. I talked to a restaurant, and they said, we don't have any food waste, I don't know what you're talking about. Then went to the next one. Like, after 30 restaurants, I felt like, oh my God, I just quit my job, actually. Should I really do this here? And then I think really the question came to me then, is Vienna the most sustainable city in Europe because we don't have food waste? And then after like the 50th and 100th restaurant, we maybe it was our pitch, the way we sold Too Good To Go also. So let's say it was me, not them, right? But it was really this lack of awareness of food waste. And I particularly remember one incident where this guy told me, I have a few avocado breads and a few snacks and sandwiches, and I throw them away at the end of the day. So, but it's exactly what we want. We want that one back. Please put it in the app, someone else can save it. So this is really this lack of awareness for food waste. And it's not just consumers it has, also all kinds of restaurants, businesses, and so on. And I'm not pointing fingers. So actually, it's the other way. We want to help those restaurants and those businesses. We need to raise the awareness, because if you don't have it, well, you're going to continue throwing it away. So I think it's, even though it's, I'm also getting tired of this mindset. We need to raise awareness, etc. But I think it's part of the equation. Yeah. For sure.
Just a small add-on question. I like Too Good To Go. I have the app on my phone. At the same time, I sometimes wonder, is this sort of, we talked earlier very briefly about sort of the luxury aspect of sustainability. Is this sort of a way that we can soothe privileged consumers into making them feel like they've made a difference? They went and saved some food waste and they can sleep better at night without really having to do as much as maybe is needed?
I think it's a really good question, and we've asked ourselves the same question many times. We still do, because at the end of the day, you need a smartphone, right? So everyone has a smartphone, maybe in Switzerland, maybe in Austria, but does everyone have a smartphone that in every corner of the world? Probably not. You need a credit card, you need a bank card. If you don't have a bank card, you actually have maybe a bigger problem. But of course, we're not accessible to 100%, we're accessible to a certain fraction of the population. The question we ask ourselves is, however, what if there wasn't Too Good To Go? Now we're saving 300,000 meals every day. They actually would go to waste because there's no other solution right now than our marketplace. There are many initiatives. It needs much more than Too Good To Go, because even we as a company, we can't save that much food. And it's an amazing number in a negative way. So we save four meals a second. 80,000 actually go to waste every second. So it's a fraction of what we save of this big problem. So I think yes and no, but I think it will take some time to change the world with an app, but we're on the way.
Cool, great. Okay, I have to jump into value chains. I really do, because I cannot imagine that we can continue to make goods cheaper and more accessible, and still fairly compensate everybody that's part of producing that product. How do we do that? How do we make a sustainable product that's affordable, where everyone in the value chain is getting a living wage? I don't want to just say seeing some of the money. They're getting a living wage.
I think it's very clear. Continuing what we're doing is not going to fix that. And the approach that we are now applying from a Coop perspective, which I can speak from, is that we're looking very much into, of course, product innovation. And we do it on the base of our private brands. Private brands is what's going to build our profile going forward. We have the luck to have the most sustainable recognized brand in the Nordics called Inglamark. It's probably not known to anyone outside of the Nordics. But it was built up about 10, 15 years ago from a Swedish heritage, and it was very much free from. And now we see, of course, we need to take it to the next level. Organic is more of an expectation. It's much more like that. And I think it's gained its success by going in again, as I said, in the top tier. So then you have a little more freedom. You don't need to stretch yourself so much in the innovative process. You can do it very much from a traditional organizational structure. So you can do your category work as you would do. And it's the same people that during a week do the purchasing and the product development for Inglamark, and then they'll do for the other brands as well, where you have less. That sort of equation doesn't work anymore. We need to specialize ourselves much more backwards in the chain. We need to work really much deeper with the partners that have the same purpose. And I'll keep coming back to that. You have to have the right purpose and the right sort of common ground, which is going to get you through when you have the tough patches and rough patches. And we need to invest resources and competences in understanding the business, figuring out what triggers it is that can enable us to actually do the right innovation, the right product development, meeting up on the criteria as we are talking about here. So the sustainability sourcing, the right way to do it. It's an enormous complex thing to say it should be sustainable. It's many, many things. And I've learned also over the years that no matter what you do, there's the backside to something. So there's a lot of trade-offs to be done here. So it's investing in innovation, not just within us, but also coming to the conclusion and understanding that we can't do it ourselves. And that's not abdicating the responsibility. I just want to underline that. But we need partners. We need startups. We need the right suppliers to join forces with us. And what we can provide is, of course, access to markets. Could be investment that goes backwards in the chain. And it can be security in the development. So, no matter what, we're going to stick with it. Because we also know from experience, you don't get 15 or 20% market share like that. I think there's a interesting thing here around the gap between what people say and what we see. So everybody, when asked, And I'm sure we'll get the same result here. Do you want to be more sustainable? Do you want to be more healthy? You'll be hard-pressed to say someone say, no, I don't want to. But what we see in front of the shelf is not the same.
Mm-hmm. So I hear you, and I want to ask for an example of what you've done to change the way you interact with communities and producers and stakeholders along your value chain. I'm just interested in what you've done, one concrete example.
For what we've done is that we've engaged now in, since I started 2 years ago in this, with a completely different partner strategy. Mm-hmm. So from the more transactional purchasing, which is still pretty dominant in the retail world, to long-term partnerships. To enter into these partnerships, of course, you spend a lot of time on do we have the same interests in terms of what we want to do for the communities. Talking about now do we meet our sustainability strategies, and do they meet? We've put up demands that they need to meet the Paris Accords within 12 months, and otherwise we cannot continue. And I think that's like very basic for me, that's the base for it. But then we'll engage continuously with these in long-term relationships. So sustainability standards have to be met, basic standards in terms of the social impact they have in their supply chain, and all of these things are also secured. So there's a set of standards. But I would still say we're on the early stages. We need to go much, much further. And what I use as inspiration basically is also what I have from a different industry, which is, again, the IKEA part, where it's 15, 20 years ahead in terms of their way of working with social engagement, as they are very active in sourcing, even in far parts of Asia. And that sort of thinking, initially, also then 10, 15 years, was said that's going to make things more expensive. It did not.
Now outsourcing manual labor to your privileged customers is excellent. That's a win-win. I have to ask one more question, and it is, can you give me a concrete example of where you're able to save while staying sustainable in your value for money line? Yeah, I think there's many examples. Actually, I think to make the equation that sustainability makes things more expensive is one of the daily conversations I have with my stakeholders, partners, and everything, because we need to really challenge that. The last example I saw on Monday, I think, was that we have reduced the brine content in tuna because we found out that there was, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 grams that are just there. So in every possible way, it makes a more sustainable production. It actually, from a transport, as it comes from pretty far, we can hire the packing, the stacking on the pallets, and all in all, the equation becomes a much more sustainable product in terms of CO2 gas emissions. So there's tons of examples. I would say there's probably not many where it doesn't make good business sense to be more sustainable. Okay. Thank you. And hopefully you can do some cellular, so cultivated tuna at some point so that we can reduce that impact as well. Okay, then I want to jump to, briefly, the role of innovation. So I want to ask you, actually, okay, I will ask you a question I wanted to ask you earlier, but then I figured I'd ask you on the panel. What's special about Uncommon? Why did Sam Altman of ChatGPT invest in your startup?
So I'll start with what's special about Uncommon, and then I'll tell you the story about Sam. But I think what sets us apart is, first of all, a true understanding of what you said, that everyone wants to be more sustainable, but no one is really going to do it. Actually, early in the days, I was kind of walking around supermarkets, talking to people, trying to understand their, what they wanted to eat. And I remember this guy, I'm talking to him and I'm asking about whether he eats processed meat or not. And he's like, no, I never eat processed meat. And at the same time as he's saying that, he takes the lasagna obviously processed, like, you know, microwavable lasagna out of his pack and quickly puts it back. And I'm like, do you think I'm blind? But to me, it was the perfect example, you know, of what you're saying. Everyone wants to be more sustainable. Everyone wants to do good. But actually, the reality, people, when they're there and they're facing the decision, they don't. I mean, I kill myself every day trying, you know, to make cultivated meat alive, but I still eat meat. And so there's a change that needs to happen, and we understand that. And so when we come to our product proposition, we've just done a study on nearly 5,000 people to understand what people actually want, why they don't like bacon, what are the things they don't like, what are the things they don't like about bacon, and what are the things they love. So how do we keep the things they love, like the taste, the crunchiness, but remove the things that they don't like, you know, feeling sluggish, heavy, feeling guilty about it. And so through our technology, we're able to address those needs in a better way. We rely as well on a non-gene edited method, and that means that we're not just accessible in places like the US, but we can be accessible very quickly through the world. So once we go to market, we don't have to just stay in the US, but we can also go to Europe, which is one of the biggest pork consumers. Sam Altman was actually funny story. So it starts actually with my old startup. So I did a small company working in B2B electronics, and I went to a talk he gave. And I remember in the talk, he said, if you're doing something really, really ambitious, it's actually not much more difficult than doing something less ambitious, because every day you're more motivated, you have more energy, you have people around you that really want to help you. And that really stuck with me. And that's why I realized I wanted to do something affecting people's health, and that would have a huge impact on that. And that's part of the reason that led me to start Uncommon. Now, Uncommon was a bit of a rough patch. So I started late 2017. We managed to raise about 100K, and that, you know, we basically used about 100K for about 2 years. And we had people giving us term sheets last minute, being like, nope, giving aggressive terms through the negotiations. So a lot of ups and downs. 2020, COVID hits, our labs shut down. We managed to do a quick prototype right before the lab shut down. It's my co-founder and I, and she's an absolute hero, right? Her partner is out of a job in about a month. We have £7 in the bank account. She has a 2-year-old. She's like, yeah, I'll just move back to my parents, I guess, if it doesn't work out. I managed to convince, you know, my parents to help a little bit more for a few months. So we have about 20K to kind of keep a little bit going. By that time, I had reached out to about 800 investors, which, for those of you who don't know, it's about, you know, 8 times more than the people that tell you they've reached a hell of a lot of investors. And everyone said basically no. I see Sam put a tweet going like, yeah, I'm starting a fund with my brothers for deep tech. And I'm like, well, one more. Let's apply to that. And I guess luckily for us, I think when you ask them, you know, Max, his brother, and Sam, why they invested, I think it's the resilience of us. Like, we didn't do it because we wanted to do something cool. We did it because we really believed that solutions are needed, and went through the ups and downs and just kept going. And I think that's why they invested. Obviously, once they wanted to invest, everyone wanted to double their money. So it made it a lot easier. But I think one of the things that make great investors, and why, you know, I think Sam is a great investor, is because they believe in people when, you know, when other people don't. And we are one example out of many others that I know where they've done that.
But that's a fantastic example, and I think it's something that we can also link back to something we've heard over and over at the symposium, which is the importance of courage. If we're gonna make a change, I think in each of your fields, there's this courage you have to bring in to really making an impact. And I think just before we forget about it and let it fade into the fray, well done. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, but I have to ask 2 more questions to you. I'm so sorry.
Go for it.
And I have to be honest, I'm a little weirded out by cultivated meat. Like, it has like this sort of Frankenstein vibe to me. And I just want to know if you've heard any. Does anyone else feel this way, and how are you managing this?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when we look at why consumers don't want to purchase, say they don't want to purchase cultivated meat, there's 2 things. One, it's weird. The other one is concerns about safety. So the first thing is safety. I mean, we don't just rely on, you know, FDA, USDA, the FSA in the UK, EFSA, to tell us what's safe. We actually really look at our process and look at the state-of-the-art research on what we believe is the best thing, because we know as well, you know, Pringles is put on the shelves, but there's a lot of cancerogenic things in Pringles. So we actually want to make sure that the ingredients that we use and the things that we use are inherently safe. So safety comes first. And then actually on, you know, on the weirdness part of it, I think for us it's actually an advantage. I think to start, our initial consumers are weird. In the company, we're all really weird in our own way, and I think it's embracing weirdness. I think there's a weirdness in all of us, and I think what will make us actually succeed is showing people, well, actually, we're all a little bit weird in some shape or form, and let's just enjoy it. And this is the bacon that you all know and love, but just with a twinkle of weirdness in it.
Okay, and why not beef? Because I'm sorry, but like when we look at the environmental and social cost of meat consumption, it's on beef.
Yeah, so there are people working on beef, and we're open to kind of partnerships around beef, but we've decided to focus on pork. Part of the reason, I mean, obviously the environment and sustainability is one of the big challenges, but another big challenge is antibiotic resistance. If we keep going the way we're going, there's going to be more people dying from antibiotic resistance than of cancer. And so it is a massive problem. In the US, there's more, you know, there's as many medically important antibiotics used on pigs than human. About 1/3 of the whole world antibiotics are used on pigs in China. Yeah. It's a massive health problem, and there's also less solutions. So a lot of people take your argument, right? And so the market is more saturated with solutions in beef. We're actually one of the few ones standing and keep continuing to do pork. And we're actually the only B2C bacon people doing bacon, and that's one of the biggest markets within pork. So someone needs to do it.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. I buy it. So, Georg, what is the next frontier of innovation for you at Too Good To Go? Where are you headed? Is it growth, more markets, more partners, or are you looking at something else?
I was just debating in my head on the innovation question. We don't really consider us as particularly innovative, or we don't even have an innovation department whatsoever. So when we look at it is product. So product development. This is where, if you would call it innovation, that this is where it is. And that comes down to really understanding the pain and the needs from our parts and consumers. And when we identify something in that area, then we develop it. And then we put an MVP on the platform and so on. But the innovation really comes from our consumers and from our partners, and anticipating that in the future also. So that's one part maybe to answer the question. And the other one is growth. So how can we actually grow more in the environment we have? We talked a little bit about scarcity and the abundance of food waste that we have. So we need to find more ways to save more food than yesterday. And one is our marketplace for sure. We've also developed a B2B software for retailers specifically when it comes to expiry dates and use-by dates. So whenever you sometimes see a store manager walking through the aisle and check expiry dates, right? That's quite manual, and then they see, okay, I need to throw it out or I need to discount it whatsoever. So we've developed a software that does that for the store manager, so you don't have to do it manually anymore. We've been launching that in a few countries already. It's coming to Switzerland as well. So this is how we help retailers at store level really reduce food waste. So that's the second pillar we have. And the third one is really expansion. So how can we actually expand faster than before. So we started in 2015-16 with the first few markets, with 17 now, with 15 in Europe, and with 2 in North America, so the States and Canada. So the next one is Australia. So we're expanding on that continent over the next few months. And there's 1 or 2 countries in Europe that I can't say, but it's very close to Switzerland. So you have to figure it out. It's somewhere in the east.
Great.
So that's the also the innovation part, I would say.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me just take a. So I'm going to open up now to questions from the audience. And I already see 2 hands. So we're going to start with you because I saw you first. Please.
I'll try to project.
I think we have a microphone even coming to you.
Thank you all so much. I'm Emily. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. I study here at the University of St. Gallen. I guess I also have an interest in this because I come from an agricultural state where 1 in 6 people are food insecure in the wealthiest country in the world. So weird paradigms and paradoxes at play. I think one place the conversation really didn't head, so maybe I can start it out. Anyone can answer the question, but we talked about how consumer changes are slow, so maybe this isn't the best solution to tackling some of these food problems. How would you maybe consider thinking about getting farmers, who are often the poorest and most food insecure people in our world, whether that's in the global north or in the global majority, how would you tackle providing food or facing food scarcity in these communities? I know this isn't any of yours, your field, but maybe you could think how could your companies or in your positions you think about these issues? Thanks.
Yeah. I'm happy to start because actually we get a lot of, well, you're going to take all the farmers' jobs and actually a couple of things. I mean, the first thing we actually can get farmers to move and do more with their land, to do things that are higher, that can get them a lot more money. The other thing is we try and work with farmers as well to get the cell lines in the first place. So we're actually working with one of the biggest meat producers in the UK, and we're working on a way where actually they can benefit as well as we grow and as we scale. They can benefit from us. Meat is also not going away. We're going to keep growing, but actually it's an and, not an or, and it can get farmers to actually focus on becoming better and working on better meat. A lot of people don't want to do the factory farming side. I mean, if you look at horses, for example, yes, cars came along, but actually horses became a sport and became, a much higher value market, and there's a lot of solutions. There's also companies, so we're not doing that, but there's a company in the Netherlands that's run by the daughter of the guy who invented cultivated meat, and she works on solutions where actually farmers can have their own mini bioreactors, so the containers in which the cells grow, and all of them, they can be part of the solution. So definitely actually a question we think about a lot.
And I'll just build on that briefly and say this is the silver bullet question that is so hard to answer. And one thing that I saw, actually, I was working with coffee farmers in Colombia, and they have access to a whole lot of support through the Federación Nacional de Cafeteros. And even when there's a ton of support and resources, and people have wet mills on their land, and people are supported in regenerating crops that have been touched by disease or pests. Even then, the situation, the current food system is set up in such a problematic way that even having these resources doesn't solve the problem. It's addressing symptoms, and it's not addressing the root still. And the answer is, I don't know. And I'm really interested in what businesses will now do, because I think it's something really challenging for business alone to tackle. It's a cross-sector issue. And exactly how to do this also depends on people knowing how to lead across sectors and collaborate across sectors, which are skills that we're still very much learning, amazingly. Really excellent question, and I'm very glad you brought it up. I heard you start to say something. I think I even interrupted you. Did you want to?
No, you didn't interrupt. Okay. It's fine. But I think I'm not aware of the Mississippi situation. Unfortunately, I haven't been there. But I think it's a global issue that we see and we watch a lot as well. There's fewer and fewer young people that engage in this industry. That's going to give us an issue long term. So I think some of the movements we see, at least from my part of the world, is that you start shortening the supply chain. We have allowed, the system has been built towards that. We have huge conglomerates that now sit on all the sort of pricing and the distribution on milk, cheeses, and so on. And they need to be broken, these cartels. You know, so I think we're almost in a situation where, again, if I go back to the late 1800s, where the cooperatives started coming up as an idea, it was to break the monopolies. And I wonder if that's really current, again, that sort of approach. Some of the best examples we have is that through our own brands, we have actually engaged with, in this case, dairy farms and dairies that were about to go out of business now, 5, 6, 7 years, but engaged with them. We had a commercial interest to push on the monopoly, but we see now that's growing up. And I think that idea is something we need to pursue. But it is a cross-section that we need to address.
Yes.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Matthias. I'm from Ghana. I am a social entrepreneur and an innovator. I run a social enterprise that works with smallholder farmers, providing them with solar-powered cold storage preservation units to be able to store fresh crops from farm to fork. My question is centered around the smallholders. I think it's very critical for us to acknowledge the fact that smallholder farmers plays critical role in strengthening food systems. And because currently there are about over 600 million smallholder farmers all over the world who are contributing between 28 to 30% or 31% of global food. And if we don't really find ways to acknowledge them and support them, it's quite difficult for us to, get it. And food security is a national security issue, And once we are not able to strengthen food security, something that becomes an issue. So my question is that, how do we provide smallholder farmers with the necessary support to be able to adapt to sustainable practices and be able to produce food and even get the food safe from their farms to the marketplace and without compromising the economic viability? Thank you.
A really excellent question that goes in a similar direction. And I think the answer is that nobody knows. Nobody knows how to do this. And what's, I think, really, first of all, if I'm honest with you, it seems like a slow-moving train to me, because we all see it happening, and everyone says we need to do something, but no one knows who can do something. Because the bottom line is the low cost of food makes things that farmers are producing, they're just not compensated anything. So even if they were compensated sort of a fair portion, whatever that might be, it's often not a living wage. Maybe they're making minimum wage, but often these things are not living wages. So, and on top of that, at least when we look at the case of coffee, if coffee gets too expensive in Colombia, then large companies are going to Vietnam or Brazil. So the global market make it so that it's really hard to make money for what you're producing, because ultimately companies have the choice to purchase wherever they want. So something, you're absolutely right, is not working. And on top of everything, a lot of the cultural heritage of these smallholder farmers is really at risk of being totally erased. And now I think, what is it? I know most about Latin America, but there I think 80% of people now live in urban environments. So people are just fleeing to cities. And a lot of farmers are selling their land to cattle farmers. So it's a huge problem. I don't have the answer. It's something that requires an urgent cross-sector collaboration of people that understand the problem, have very competent leadership abilities, are courageous, and are really curious and open to hearing the perspectives of the people sitting across the table, and are inviting, for example, smallholders into the room as well. Because a lot of the solutions are being developed at the highest levels of government and business, and we don't even have the producers in the room. That's a huge problem. Do any of you want to add anything to this?
Nothing qualified
Yeah.
to answer.
Sums it up well.
Is that fine for you now? I think the answer is, yeah, please. Mm-hmm.
Yes, so I definitely agree with you on that, and especially when it comes to even farmers selling their crops, because usually when the farmers harvest it, they need to. Usually when farmers harvest their crops, because I work at the grassroots, and for me, I believe that whilst it will take too much time for us to be able to probably address this, I feel it's about time we look at the grassroots and how best we can even start looking at it from the local level. And because I can tell you for a fact that even in my country, Ghana, there are some smallholder farmers whose produce are being exported to Europe. You know, and it has taken the courage and leadership of certain entrepreneurs who work directly at the grassroots levels, giving farmers with capacity building and the necessary resources to be able to produce the quality food that will be able to even reach the export market. You know, so for me, I believe that whilst it's an issue, we need to still look at how we can support farmers at the grassroots and see how we can collaborate with local organizations and even the government to be able to put policies in place, because if there is that kind of policy, it becomes well structured for us to assist these farmers. Thank you.
That's a really good point. Thank you for bringing it up. Are there any other? Yeah, please. White shirt, second row.
Hello, thank you very much for the interesting panel, interesting discussion, very insightful comments. So my name is Christina. I'm doing a PhD in quantum algorithms, which probably has nothing to do with that, with the topic. Okay, but I'm very passionate about food waste. And as a student, I worked in a restaurant back in Scotland. And I asked my manager, can we bring some of the food that we are not going to eat and that is going to go bad tomorrow? Can we bring it to the literally there was homeless people in front of the restaurant, and she told me, no, we cannot do that, because if something happens, if this person eats our food and something happens to him, if they die or they go to the hospital, we will be in trouble. So I'm not going to risk my restaurant, I'm not going to risk just because you care about food waste. So the question goes to Georg, I guess, but also in general, you can take it. What are the regulations that needs to be in place, and how are you dealing with these sensitive topics? What if I get something out of to go and I get sick because the food was contaminated or something? How do you deal with that? Thank you.
And had you thought of giving that food to charity in Scotland, or just directly to the homeless people or to the poor?
I personally asked her to give it directly because they were literally on the street in front of us. I don't know about charities.
Okay.
Again, it's not my field, but it's just something that I'm very passionate about. Thank you.
First of all, thanks for trying it at least, right? So first step. Not entirely sure of the regulation in Scotland per se, but there is something a lot about liability when handing out foods, but usually it's the institution or organization or the person that gives out the food is liable for this. And as a restaurant, probably it's a fair question the person asks himself, so should I do it actually? So probably if you do it through a charity, they will then have to take the liability and also the food safety measures to actually to give it out. So there is a legal component on that. But charities have found a way, and food banks actually do that. So they take the liability, or there is some sort of gray areas when I look at the markets we operate in Too Good To Go. It's not entirely 100% legally clarified yet. So there's actually some regulation that we need to change in most of the markets. So I'm not sure exactly about Scotland. And the second part is when we look at Too Good To Go, we're actually a marketplace. So we don't buy the food, we don't sell the food. We're actually just the intermediary. We make it happen that a restaurant or a retailer actually can sell the food waste through our platform. So then it's exactly the same thing as I would sell it on the cash desk or anywhere else or through the app. So here we don't actually have zero liability problems from a marketplace or for consumer side. It would actually be then the retailer, would be Coop or whoever who takes the liability for this. I think what we always recommend the restaurants, actually just go to a charity, donate your food. It's good that you're doing it. You need to exploit all kinds of opportunities that there are, and there's many. It's food banks, charities, it's Too Good To Go, it could be food sharing and so on. And in terms of a liability question, it's quite market specific, so I wouldn't be able to answer that for Scotland.
Maybe
You're an expert here too, I think. So.
No, I can just add into it because I'm familiar with that discussion as well. It's in several countries that this happens and is used and as a showstopper, and we don't do the right things. But I just think it's important also to comment on the fact that I do think that legislation plays a huge role and can play a huge positive role when it comes to food waste. And for me, the very obvious part is, of course, we work and have responsibility in working with shelf life, extending shelf life by innovation in packaging. However, also, I think there is grounds to look at our best before dates and the whole system as we have tightened that up. I can see it. My grandmother would never throw out half the food I throw out because it says a specific date. There's nothing wrong with it. But we've cultivated some sort of tightened best before date culture that also generates. And I think we need to look at that also from a legislative perspective.
I think maybe just one quick point more practically. I mean, we work with foods that aren't yet regulated, and we've had, for example, investor tasting. I mean, there are forms that are just simple. You can get people to kind of move the liability, right? So to acknowledge. So, for example, you could say, okay, well, here's a form that this homeless person has signed and says it's their, no, but that says it's their liability. So here's the food, and you sign that it's the liability, and the restaurant has then a form saying, and so there are the big changes that need to happen from a country perspective, but there's also tactical, fast things that you can do.
Thank you. I think we can take one more question, and it will be yours. Yeah. Yes, you. It's on its way.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. My name is Kata Isenring. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at ETH Zurich. Currently, I'm interested in cooperatives and social innovation and scaling social innovation. And I have a radical provocation for you. You were talking about mindset change earlier. So why not make plant-based diet default in society? Retailers have a great power here to shape the habits of consumers. So make plant-based default, and anytime people want to, indulge in meat or cheese, celebrate, that can be a special add-on, and we pay the price for that too. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's a super good question, and I don't think it's necessarily very provocative, but because in essence we need to go to that direction. But I can share some experiences I've had, then, in particularly with the IKEA and the food part. 680 million people at that time eats in the IKEA restaurants. That's quite a reach, and we had the same discussions. It's a company that is very serious around the sustainability and health agenda. And it's hard to explain with the furniture sometimes, so the food became sort of in the forefront of it. And we did everything from taking all the candy out of the stores, because luckily they don't live off the candy turnover. And we also actually took the brave, I think, challenge and challenging these meatballs. Because meat and what we have there is the big footprint. Developed a vegetable which is just veggie-based, non-meatball. And we had one guidance to all the stores. You cannot price it higher, so it has to be on par or lower. And most countries were brave enough to go lower. And we were hoping for maybe seeing a shift of, 20-30%. I mean, doesn't get greater than that. We had to go through a couple of loops. The first one we did simply wasn't tasty enough. And what we found out is you need to make it attractive. It just needs to taste good. So people will say that they want a sustainable solution, but if it's not delicious, they're not going to touch it. You need to price it lower. And we reached, I think, some 15-18% relatively fast. So it's a great proposal to go there. My experience is it takes a bit of time. We tried to also force it in Germany as a test. The test lasted 2 days. When we took the French fries off the plates, that didn't work. So I don't believe much in the forcing part. I believe in our job is to create the alternatives very fast and at the right price points.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think it's completely idealistic to provoke you back. I mean, first of all, you know, in a sense, I mean, realistically, I mean, okay, you can say that about travel as well. And so why are we all here? Why did we travel from around the world? Let's just do everything from Zoom. It worked great with COVID. Why not do it? There are reasons. There are, you know, there's whole industry. I mean, the meat industry is a $1 trillion industry. What are you going to do? Shut it down from a day to another? I mean, you know, we work with some of those companies. We are scaling at some scale, but you can't shut down a whole industry from one day to another. I think, you know, it's something people care about. I mean, you see even cultivated meat. I mean, there's 3 companies in the whole world, and together maybe they sold 1,000 kilograms. And people all around the US are trying to ban cultivated meat, going crazy about it. And we're not even on the freaking market, you know? So imagine if supermarket just said, like, no, there's no meat, you can have meat once a week, and it's rationalized. I mean, the protests that are gonna happen, no one's gonna do that. And it's lovely as a theoretical, philosophical question. The reality is just, there's no world in which it will happen, I see.
Excellent. And on that, not so optimistic note, but frank observational note, let's wrap it up. And I want to ask a question to each of you, and we're pushing it on time a little bit, so it's a deep question, and it'll have to be a short answer. But basically, in closing, we've heard from the start of the symposium about the risks of fragmentation. We heard this from Karin Keller-Suttel, how it raises costs and complexity, and our current food systems are really defined by fragmentation. We've been reminded of the importance of community and of courage. So how can your work in our food industry be a lever for rebuilding and regenerating our communities? We can start with you, Georg.
I think we just continue what we're doing right now. So I have 100% confidence that what Too Good To Go is doing, the disruption of the food waste industry, called this way, is the right course for the next 5, 10, 15 years probably. So we're not going to change food waste tomorrow, not in 5, also not in 10 years. But raising the awareness for food waste and giving a tool to retailers and all kinds of food businesses is a huge lever when it comes to reducing CO2 emissions. And I mentioned earlier, around 10% of all the greenhouse gases come from food waste. So there's actually studies that show if we reduce food waste, it could be the biggest lever in the environmental movement, basically. So we need to give tools and provide a marketplace for businesses and for consumers. And if you want to do something on your very personal, private level, I think you could think of alternatives. And we saw the statistic here. There's intention, there's willingness, but the consumer has so much purchasing power and decision-making power. It's you every day that can decide, and then it's going to get thrown out of Coop if you don't buy it. That's how it works. So your decision is with you on an individual basis. It is what it is.
Great. Thank you. Benjamina, 1 minute.
Yeah, I'll take the question slightly differently. I think we've talked a lot about the impact of cultivated meat, so I'll talk a little bit about uncommon, what I hope as well to see more, particularly in Switzerland, where I think people don't do that enough, is to give equity to all employees. So where from technician to VPs, we give equity to every single employee that we have, and as we scale, we'll continue to do that. And what that means, it's if and when we're successful, that creates a lot of wealth and success within the whole organization, and that then pays forward. And we've seen it work really well, in the US, where people then go and angel invest in lots of new startups and continue to grow that community. So it's one thing, the bigger community, but I think speaking about the biotech and the food community, we want to make sure that all of our employees, when we're successful, can continue to make their own businesses, invest in other businesses, and I'd like to see in Switzerland a lot more equity plays versus just money.
Great, thank you. And Michael?
Yeah, I think it's nothing is stronger than a very good example, and I think that's what we can provide. I think we will continue the path we're on really bringing products, the good examples, the alternatives to the market, and it's a huge order that is ahead of us. But I take a lot of inspiration actually from today, from the fact that. Very well said that you get actually it's much better to take on a huge challenge because you're much more motivated. It gives you more energy, and the people around you feel that they're on a mission. So the purpose we've installed 2 years ago is very important to us to create a better everyday, and that really transcends through everything we do. And then I actually think it's also perhaps really time now to get some more new life into the spirit of the cooperative, because it's only when we work together that we're going to solve this.
Fantastic. There's no better note to end on. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Thanks to all of you for spending the last hour and 15 minutes with us on this important topic. Let's please feel empowered to continue the conversation over lunch. So thanks again.